You may be familiar with what a civil engineer is and some of the disciplines that are typical to civil engineers, such as structural, transportation, geotech. But today I want to talk about a very specific, very specialized discipline, and that is an airport engineer. What is an airport engineer? What do we do? And why are we even important? Today I want to talk about how I became an airport engineer and what exactly we even do. Growing up, I never thought I was going to be an airport engineer. What the heck is that? Nobody's even heard of that most of the time. So how would I even know that that's what I wanted to be? Well, I didn't, and this is the story of how it came to be and then what I do now. So my interest in engineering started in middle school when there was a class offered. They called it engineering, but really we basically played with Legos. It was Lego Mindstorms, which was a engineering programming type kit that you could get to introduce kids into the engineering fields, the science, engineering, technology, math fields. And that was kind of my introduction. And that really got me interested in engineering and wanting to learn more. And luckily, I had the opportunity to take a high school class of engineering when I was still in middle school. So of course I signed up, and I would have to get up early every morning, catch an early bus, and go over to the high school and do this class first thing in the morning. And it ended up being one of the best things I ever did. I took at least one engineering class every year of high school, and that's where I discovered that I really enjoyed engineering and that I wanted to pursue a career in engineering. But I didn't know what kind of engineering. So luckily enough, my teacher gave us an assignment to research the different fields of engineering and pick one to explore further and to write a report on why that field of engineering was of interest and why you think that that would be something that you would want to go into in the future. I ended up picking civil engineering mostly from what I remember because it was the most broad and most wide-ranging, and I wanted to know a lot about the world and how it works, and didn't want to put myself in a corner. So picked civil engineering. Didn't know what discipline I wanted to be in, but I picked civil engineering. Went to college multiple years later, graduated college, and then went job hunting. Of course, at this point, I still had no idea what an airport engineer was, or that really an airport engineer existed, and I was looking for jobs. But I happened to have an in at a company that did a lot of airports, and at the time that was kind of their primary focus. I ended up getting hired and joining the aviation group, and kind of the rest has just been aviation then on. I did have a short stint of trying land development and a short assignment on inspection for a oil pipeline, which was actually very interesting, but that's a story for a different day. But all in all, I've pretty much been working on airports for most of my career to this point. So that puts me in an interesting position where I think I'm able to generally explain what an airport engineer does, and maybe that might be something that interests you, or you just want to learn a little bit more about who puts the world together around us and tries to keep it together, because we're all trying to keep it together. So airport engineering kind of follows the traditional structure to any other large-scale city plannings, things like that. So we do everything from the planning to design and to the construction of projects from those planning and design phases. And for that matter, I've worked in the planning, design, and construction, all three phases, which is the beauty of being an airport engineer. You get the exposure to a very wide breadth of topics and experiences. So specifically in planning, we work with another obscure career path called an airport planner, kind of like a city planner, but plans airports. There you go. And what happens is the engineers and the planners get together and they work with the FAA and the airport and the city and any other stakeholders that are involved in the airport. And they develop a plan for the next 20 years for the airport to develop, grow, to expand, to maintain. We try to consider as many different scenarios as possible to give the best alternative for the future of the airport. And the citizens and the community around it, as well as we help to guide the airport in the spaces they have for developing hangars. So things like just randomly building wherever is convenient don't happen, and there's a plan to put things in specific places to make them work in an efficient way for the airport. But we also go as far as to investigate obstructions to the protected airspace and anything that's penetrating that airspace that isn't allowed, then we have to mitigate for that. We have to mitigate for roads. We have to mitigate for all sorts of different things on and around the airport. And that's what the planning phase is for. It's to develop alternatives, to forecast growth of aircraft operations, hangar owner tenants needing space to park aircraft, apron space to park aircraft, future businesses on the airport, and storage facilities and managers' offices and terminal expansions and terminal parking. So the gist and the role of engineers in the planning phase is to provide engineering input on things on a high level of what could be possible and make sure that things are feasible that the planners may be proposing. Because if the planner wants to put a taxiway somewhere and we can't build for one reason or another, then we need to have input on what we can do and what our limitations are. And so the engineers provide that, and they also help to provide the list of projects because they're familiar with the pavement conditions and things like that. So engineers have a not complete involvement, but a large involvement in helping to produce a good quality master plan, especially since it's supposed to be a plan for 20 years looking ahead, which is a very hard thing to plan for. So probably the first thing everybody thinks of when they think of an engineer is they're nerds that design stuff on computers and make plans, and yeah, that's true. But airport engineers do that too. But airport engineers do it over a very wide breadth of disciplines. Some of the disciplines that we have to at least know a little bit about or work in on a regular basis are structural for buildings, retaining walls. We also work with geotechnical and have to understand the results of geotechnical investigations, just like most other civil engineers. We work with architects that help with designing new terminals and new buildings, but as well as helping to demolish old buildings that need to be removed. We do a lot of hydrology work because all the rainwater on the airport needs to be kept on the airport and evaporated or infiltrated into the ground. And that's a huge portion because of the large area an airport occupies, but the very little space that it has to store water in different places. We also help to design the pavements on airports, and we also work in electrical. We help to lay out the circuits for the lights all around the airport and all of the navigational aids and the wind cones and the weather systems and anything else that's required to run an airport. It's more than you might think. So airport engineers work in a wide area of disciplines. But what we do differently from traditional transportation engineers is we interpret and understand the FAA guidance that directs how to design and implement taxiways and aprons and building the pavement section and laying out the lights in a proper manner. So a good portion of our job is interpreting the guidance and requirements given to us from the FAA and implementing those on each site on a site-by-site basis, obviously. So what we do as far as actually designing is we draw the taxiways and we determine the geometry and the thicknesses of the asphalt and the grades to help with drainage and to infiltrate water and design the layout for the lights. So we do a lot of similar things that transportation engineers do, but just with a different set of rules and a different set of guidelines. So what typically happens is a project that is laid out in planning is ready to be designed. The FAA is ready to complete that project. And so we take the initial concept from planning and we develop that into a full plan to actually construct what was anticipated in the planning phase. We develop all the plan sheets and a huge book of specifications to tell a contractor exactly how to start with what you have, and this is what we need. The way I like to look at it is we build very complex Lego instruction books, but all the parts are not Lego parts, and the instructions are very much more complex, but we still try to make them as simple as we can, but the complexity is still greater than a Lego set. So throughout the design phase, the engineer also works with the client to present the alternatives, to ask the questions, to give the client time to review and make sure that everything on the plan works for their airport, and they work with the public to make sure that everything's in agreement. We work with environmental to make sure the environmental agencies are clear and accepting that this project is not a hazard and will not be a hazard. And there's a lot of communication that goes on that you wouldn't typically think of an engineer as being stereotypically great at communicating, but in reality, engineers have to be really great at communicating, and the design phase is huge for that because you need to be able to tell everyday citizens what exactly you're doing in a way that they can understand it. So it's important to be able to communicate effectively. So and finally, the construction phase where everything comes to life and the project that started as a few lines in AutoCAD on a sheet of paper that turned into a lot of lines in AutoCAD on a lot of sheets of paper then becomes reality in the real world, and the contractor constructs it. So what's so special about what an airport engineer does versus any other engineer? Well, airport engineers spend a lot more time on construction and building projects. And that is somewhat what differentiates airport engineering from other engineering, is that the FAA requires that an engineer's representative be on site anytime the contractor is doing work. So therefore, I have spent a lot of time on construction, inspecting and answering questions and asking questions and gaining more knowledge and understanding of construction. And I think that's special in airport engineering. So specifically, we provide construction administration services. So like if there's something that changed and we need to change the contract and the contractor needs to get paid more to do some extra work, we also help coordinate the payment owed to a contractor from the client. We mitigate and act as a middleman to sit between the client and the contractor and coordinate between them. So we play a very active role as airport engineers in construction because we have to coordinate between so many different stakeholders. And that makes for a very unique experience. Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of private jet rides or anything fun like that because usually we're shutting things down and that doesn't make a ton of friends. So that's how I became an airport engineer, and that's a quick rundown of what airport engineers do. If you want to learn more about airports, check out my runway markings video here. If there's something you want me to cover, leave it down below in the comments. And stick around, I'll be making more airport videos. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.